At this point, I'll ask everyone to please silence your cell phones, both up here on the committee and also in the room. And welcome everybody to our first meeting. We're getting going right away, and we're going to have a couple of interesting presentations today. We've got a lot we'll take up this session, so we look forward to a very productive working group with our committee. At this point, I'd like to ask Representative Stubbs if he would open us with prayer.
Our Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this opportunity to gather together. We are grateful for the privilege we have to serve the people of the state of Alabama. We are grateful for the people who support and encourage and uplift our students in our schools, and we ask Thee to bless each of us today with clarity of mind, with an opportunity and a desire to serve those around us. We ask Thee to bless the children of our schools and the faculty and staff who support and sustain them. We ask Thee to bless us with safety this day and be with us always and help us to follow the example of the Savior. And this we say in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Clerk will call the roll. Here.
Representative Keel. Here. Representative Drummond. Representative Almond. Here. Representative Baker. Representative Chestnut. Representative Collins. Here. Representative Pauling. Representative Daniels. Representative Ellis. Here. Representative Faulkner. Representative Lawrence. Here. Representative Lovern. Representative Stubbs. Here. Representative Wood. 11 members of the roll call.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'd like to introduce to the group today an intern that will be working with us this session. Do I see Grace in the room? Where's Grace? Grace. Okay. Grace Heim. She's from Enterprise, Alabama, a student at Auburn University, majoring in political science. She'll be with us all session. So welcome, Grace. This is our first meeting. We have a few members out, but I just want to review our rules of the committee, just so for everyone's edification. We want you to make sure you please pay close attention to the dates and times and the locations of our meetings. Normally they'll be here, but they may be subject to change. We will always start on time, not today withstanding, but today we were thrown off a little bit. We will follow rules of procedure and we'll conduct ourselves in an orderly fashion as we always have. I will call on all members in the order that I see you. We'll take as much time as committee members wish as we discuss issues. If there are materials or meetings that you want to schedule, please let Ms. Cheeks, Karen, know in advance. If you're concerned about any bills that are on the agenda or being placed on the agenda, please communicate with me. I always have an open door policy, as you know. I also want to make sure that we, in our discussions, committee, this is a forum for policy debate. We need to really be very transparent, be very candid, but we don't really want to have this be a political or speech forum. So I think we've always done a good job in doing that. And so we want to really have vigorous debate, thorough scrutiny, but let's make sure that we're looking and stay focused on being productive. And also, I would ask you to hold me to that same standard. So any questions or comments from the members? If not today, I would like to recognize we have 3 presentations today. We had budget hearings yesterday, so we did hear some from some of these groups. So those that spoke yesterday, you can kind of adjust or abbreviate your comments because we heard that yesterday. But first up today, I'm going to go out of order, I think. I'm going to ask that Neah Scott with Retirement Systems of Alabama please come first. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for letting me present. I know pensions aren't exactly the most interesting topic, but we always appreciate the opportunity to get in front of y'all and let y'all know what's going on with RSA. Before I get started, I do have two people from RSA with me, Joe Moore, our Deputy Director, and Diane Scott, our CFO. So if y'all have a question I can't answer, they definitely can. No pressure. So, Karen, do we have the clicker? Oh, right here. It's been a morning. So Today I'm going to talk about TRS and PHIP, but I always like to start and give y'all kind of the greater context. What we normally come to you for as the Education Budget Committee is focused on TRS and PHIP, but RSA also administers the pensions for ERS, which includes the state and also about 900 local units, cities, counties, and other local boards. We also do JRF, which is the retirement for judges and for all DAs and clerks hired after 2016. Also within ERS is the state police retirement plan. So we touch most public employees in the state. Now within TRS, a lot of time we focus on K-12, but TRS also includes the universities, the community colleges, and kind of your education-oriented state agencies. But K-12 is still the largest part of TRS and is a really big driver of kind of policy considerations within TRS. I like to give y'all this slide, and by the way, we're getting copies to you, so by the end of the committee meeting, we can leave you with a paper copy too. And this is kind of your cheat sheet for where are we on the Tier 1 and Tier 2 benefits. As you all know, the past few years, we've been making a lot of changes to Tier 2, and so kind of every session, we have to get this updated and leave this with y'all. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but if you have a question, this should answer most everything about the benefits. And Tier 2 has become a bigger topic in the past few years because it's a bigger portion of TRS. Tier 2 was created in 2013, and as you can see, Tier 2 is almost about to overtake the Tier 1 membership. So their concerns and their issues are a larger part of the conversation than they have been in years past, and there's been a lot of talk about what tweaks need to happen to the benefits to help with recruitment and retention, and y'all have done some of that, like the sick leave conversion was pretty big for teachers.
Just clarify, just explain Tier 1, Tier 2. Who's in Tier 1, who's in Tier 2?
Everyone who has been a member of RSA, had any service credit in RSA prior to 2013 is Tier 1. Anyone that was hired on or after in January of 2013 is in Tier 2. So I'm Tier 2 because I started in September of 2013. So this is a different chart that I haven't shown y'all before. We kind of started tracking some of the retirement rates during COVID based on some media requests that were interested in how COVID was impacting K-12 teachers and were they leaving the classroom and that sort of thing. And so through that process, we started paying more attention. And it's very interesting. This is just the retirement rates for K-12 employees. So this isn't the entire population of TRS. And you can look at the dips and the peaks, and we can tie them to different policy changes from the legislature. And when we look at TRS as a whole, or ERS, it's a lot more level. Those policy changes don't impact other TRS members and ERS members the way that they do teachers. So if you look at the increase in 2011, that was due to the sliding scale changes for healthcare were going into place, and so you had a lot of people retire before that was applicable. You also had DROP was closing, so a lot of people were getting their retirement in so they could enter the DROP program. And then if you look at the 2012-13, that was when the Tier 1 member contribution rate increased. And so you may have had some people go ahead and retire because of that. And then the big change recently, you see that drop. That was when y'all made the changes to the salaries for the end-of-year teachers. And we kind of saw that real time. That was in, I think, March or April of 22. And we had started getting a record number of retirement applications for June 1, which is normally when teachers retire. And as soon as y'all did that, it dropped off immediately. And we started to see a declining retirement rate. So it had a big impact.
Yes, let me just make the point here. We're going to talk through the session about teacher shortage, about lack of teachers graduating from college, salary matrix, things like that. But one thing that we've been concerned about was also the the teacher retirements, which have been people leaving the system and exacerbating the problems we already have. So I can see what you can see through teams, through the matrix changes, through the salary adjustments, we can just say that those have impacted and slowed down the retirements.
I agree. I like to put up numbers, and this is just a good chart for the past 10 years for both the active number of members and their compensation and the retired members and their compensation. I'm going to skip through it, though. I'm going to talk briefly about funding. I know a lot of y'all that have been on the committee have probably heard me talk about this ad nauseum, but that RSA is funded from 3 different pots: from the member contribution rate that's set in statute, from the employer contribution rate that you set that is paid by each participating employer on the member's salary, and then the third pot is investment returns. And so we talk a lot about, when we talk about funding and talk about RSA, about unfunded liability. So what does that mean? So the unfunded liability is we always look at the liability and the asset. So the actuaries project out what is our total liability for everyone currently employed and everyone retired. So how much money do you need to pay that out and that reduced to the present value versus what do we have in the bank? And so the difference in that is the unfunded liability, and it's something we track pretty closely. And so we talk about it in terms of a funded ratio and what are we funded at. And Chairman Garrett knows this is not my favorite chart, but I'm going to present it every year because it is what it is. Back in 2000, we were 100% funded. And there were a number of things that kind of attributed to the decline in funding: four unfunded retiree COLAs, and then 2 really bad investment markets, one being 2008 and 2009 recession. And unfortunately, it takes a lot longer to come back from it than it does to fall down. And you might look at this and say, well, it doesn't look like you've made progress. But you have to look at what is underlying the funded ratio. And a lot of the reason why the ratio has not increased is because at the same time, the boards have been making changes to the actuarial assumptions in the funded policy that are good fiscally conservative changes. They're things that need to be done so that you are trying to fund the plan at a realistic amount. It's things like lowering the assumed rate of return, which we've been doing over the past 10 years. Things like changing the mortality tables. We're going to assume people are going to live longer. But what do those things do? They increase your liabilities. So you've got good underlying assumptions, but it's kind of lowering your funded ratio. But I think I'd rather have a low funded ratio and good, healthy assumptions than a high funded ratio and poor assumptions, because this means we're going to stay on the right track.
So let me just comment on this. So first of all, we were 100% funded at one point. What year was that?
2000.
2000. And then you can see a series of cost of living adjustments. So this is when you make those COLAs, which are not funded. And what? Yes, yeah, they're unfunded. So what happens is when you make that cost of living adjustment, you increase the liability for everyone that's going to retire for 30 years or however long it's out there. That changes actuarially all the computations. And every time you do those unfunded COLAs, that increases your liability, but you're not feeding any more money into the system to help with that because you're not funding and I think you said it's about $2 billion we think to the number from the
just from those 4.
From those 4 were like $2 billion. So that's why that's important. Also mentioned that we've changed some actuarial assumptions. So early on when they do these things, they would assume that the fund was going to earn 8%. Well, rates got down to 0% almost, and so that was an unrealistic assumption. Although you have a mix of assets that earn at varying rates, the fact that interest rates kind of declined, we adjusted that under that, which you think it's kind of counterintuitive. You think, well, you've got less less that you have to meet. But the problem is, that's less they're going to earn, which means you're going to have to contribute to catch that up, to meet the obligations you've set. And then, so those are conservative assumptions, though, because you don't want to underfund because you're assuming the fund is going to earn more than it is. So where is the funded ratio today? I can't see.
It's at 67%.
Okay, so that's not great. You really would like ultimately to be 80%, I think, and that's kind of a healthy. 67% is not great. 50%, you're really in trouble. So I think we're at a point where we're looks like we're dipping. Part of that has to do with, like you said, the assumptions, but also, I guess, the earnings, the environments, the market changes.
It's really three things that we're continuing to adopt: the 5-year experience assumption changes. This funded ratio only takes into account the fiscal year 22 investment returns, which were negative. And then it's also salary increases. That sounds counterintuitive.
Yes, so every time we increase salaries, which helps our teacher retirement, helps our teacher shortage situation, you're creating additional liability, which you have to fund over.
Increasing them kind of outside of the norm.
Right.
When it's kind of normal salary increases, the actuaries account for that, but y'all have done some bigger things, which are good, and we're never going to fight you on it because, it's going to lower our assumed rate of return, our funded ratio. No, you need to do those things. And
the other thing we've done is consistently fully fund your requirements. So you're going to do all this stuff and come back and say, here's what we need to keep fully funded.
Right.
And sometimes those numbers have been large. And if those numbers, if we say we're going to do half of that, well, that's fine. That helps our cash flow right now, but it increases that liability and makes that funding go down. So I think we're at a point where that dip looks a little bit concerning at first, but I think there's the reasons behind that are, again, like you say, decisions primarily by the legislature that we've done, but that's to address the problem we've got, which is, and again, going from tier 1 to tier 2 helped us from this standpoint because it changed the increased employee contribution, it revised some things, but at the end of the day, if we're going to have public education and we're going to have teachers, we've got to be competitive at the market. So this is an important thing to the state, but it's complicated. Any questions or comments about any of that from anybody? Okay, thank you.
So we'll talk a little bit about investment returns, earnings. So we assume 7.45%. And then I'll throw up, I said earlier that 67% takes into account the fiscal year 22 return, but doesn't take into account the 23 return yet. That will be in next year's rate. So the 23 return was much better, was, 13%. And that's something we've kind of been dealing with the past few years, and I know y'all probably have too, is the market volatility. I mean, we went from over a 20% return in 21 to a negative 10% in 22, now back up to 13%. And that's also why we don't recognize all gains and losses from investment returns at once. If we did, the employer rate would jump up and down and y'all couldn't budget. And so we do what we call 5-year smoothing, and you recognize a fifth at a time. And so it kind of layers out and smooths out a little bit. I do like to brag on the investment staff. One thing that RSA has always done a little bit differently is we do our investments in-house, and we have in-house CFAs that invest the money, and we don't use a bunch of outside money managers, which saves money. Our investment expenses are $15.3 million, and if we just had the average expense for other pensions, it would be at $198.8 million. I like to throw up the employer contribution rate timeline just to let y'all know we're always on a delay. So it goes back to we're bringing you a return that doesn't take into account the 23 return, and that's just the timing with the actuaries and everything. And then this is kind of what I put up every session about the employer rates. It shows you what the rates are for Tier 1 and Tier 2 and what we estimate the total dollar amount is. And so we get this from each participating employer. And so it doesn't come from the budget, it comes from them. But this is kind of where we're at. So there's an increase in total dollars that we estimate for the fiscal year 25 rate of about $87 million. And then this is just a good comparison. Kind of we talked about the volatility in the past 3 years. The member contributions, the employer contributions stay pretty steady. They generally increase every year as salaries increase, but you can see what happens with the investment income. It can kind of be all over the place. And so we had 2 really good years with a really bad year in between. But this kind of shows historically what the share is for the member contributions, employers, and investment income. So this is from 73 to 23, how that kind of has broken out. I'm going to move on to PHIP, but before I do, is there any questions about RSA or anything I've kind of thrown at you really quickly?
I'll just say this, going back, we always hear about COLAs, cost of living adjustments for retirees, and again, that will, exacerbate the decline in the funded ratio. What we have done sometimes with extra money is we'll do like a 13th month check, which is something we pay out of supplemental money or budget money. That's not an obligation that affects the retirement liability going forward. So that's tended in recent years, if we've been able to do something with retirees, it's tended to be a check one time that doesn't affect the long-term retirement obligation.
Exactly. So moving on to PHIP, I'm going to speed through this because I know there's 2 more presentations. PHIP does the health insurance for active and retired education employees. And how we are funded is through the employer rate that is set as an active member per month rate. And so all the participating employers in PHIP pay that rate on each active employee. And y'all set the rate in the budget. And so currently the rate is set at $800 per member per month. And we are coming for the 9th year in a row to ask for the same rate. Diane and the rest of the PHIP team have done a fantastic job in managing the plan so that we can continue to ask for the same rate. We've also had the benefit at the same time of we've had an increase in actives. So while the rate stayed at $800, we have seen an increase in the total dollar because as y'all have implemented programs and given the funding to add reading coaches, math coaches, nurses, that's adding active members to the population.
So once again, 9 years straight without an increase to employees' health insurance cost.
Yes.
That's quite remarkable.
It's a fun thing to get to come tell y'all. I don't know how much longer we'll get to come say that, but this is kind of a breakdown of our funding sources, which as you can see, the majority is the employer contribution. Members also pay in premiums. And then one other thing that is helped us come for the 9th year in a row is last year, y'all were able to get us $99 million to reimburse us for our COVID expenses. So you did $40 million of it in the ARPA bill and then another $59 million in the supplemental. And that's a huge help. And this is just a breakdown of how the 800 is used. So you fund based on the actives, but that funds both the actives, their dependents, their retirees, and their dependents. And this is just a breakdown of what that 800 equals in dollars. And like the retirement, it's a lot. So we're at about 996 million. I'll just skip through. And this is kind of our go-to funding chart. You can look at it and see what the rate was set at, what the expenses were for the year, what the total dollar amount we got from the rate, and also from the members. And just briefly remind y'all, we also have a trust fund for retiree health care. The legislature created that in 2007 at a time when they were starting to look at retiree health care liability the same way we do pension liability. And so there was a movement to offset your liabilities with assets. So y'all created the trust, and then we've been able to fund it with 2 large deposits back in 2007 and 8, and it has grown significantly. I think we're at 1.6 billion. And per the law, this can only be used for retiree health care, and you can only withdraw 10% of the market value at a time. And we've made a withdrawal twice. But we do budget this in every year to kind of help offset, you know, we do these projections kind of far out, and it's a good kind of balance to that, but we have not had to dip into it since we have been budgeting that way. And that's all I have.
Thank you. So just bottom line, your request this year to fully fund the retirement is how much?
It is the dollar amount or the rate? 1.1 billion.
And versus last year, what's the change?
It was it's an $87 million change.
Okay, $87 million change.
The rate's gone up about 1%.
And how much of that's K-12?
I don't know necessarily K-12, but what we estimate that will flow from the ETF is about $663 million, which the majority of that, I think, would be through K-12.
And last year, that was how much? Do you?
611 million.
Okay, so that's the difference we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Any questions for Ms. Scott? Thank you very much, and you'll get a copy of your presentations to all the members.
Yes, I will. Thank y'all.
Dr. Purcell, we heard from you yesterday. Thank you. I think just an abbreviated view today, so we can only absorb so much, right?
Absolutely, sir, and I am prepared to do less with more. We'll wait till the PowerPoint, here it is. And just sort of to highlight, the big thing is we just want to move some things for good accounting to different buckets. Eric had mentioned yesterday that he would take the leftover one-time money. And that is true. We'll be glad to take a supplement if we're not funded otherwise. And the reason we want to do that is our budget is small. So when we're asking for a 35% increase, that basically means that 35% of AIC's budget is in supplemental one-time money. And you know that sort of fluctuates over time. It's not a good place for a small agency to be. So that's why we want it in recurring money and put in the budget, and it sort of maintains over time. And we also get it in the same cycle where we have other programs. So sort of like the Re-Engage program, we have to start it in January because the cash flow allows us to start it in January, and really we want to start it in the fall, so we have more students involved in those scholarships. So the big thing is to keep your eye on all of these, and we're not going to go over specifics, but notice that we'd love to still have in supplemental a little bit less than 5 million, and then move everything else over to the more ongoing bucket. It sort of seems to sustain itself over time. So it's important to us, and it's because it's a big part of it. And then I mentioned the 400,000 that we want to increase in operation and maintenance, and we compared all the other agencies in the ETF that received like 35% or more, 30% or more. Over that 5-year period, we only got 8%. And what we were doing is we were basically funding our staff through basically charging the pass-throughs that come through our office about 3%. And in prior years, we always did do that just in case there was a proration or something, but we always gave them refunds at the end if the money was available. So, but we've had to use those funds to sort of cover things and to cover shortfalls sometimes in our need-based aid and things like that. So with that, I do have a couple other things, but I'll be glad to answer any questions about this before I move to the other. Don't worry. I wanted to show you a couple more charts about Alabama, just for the, you're going to have conversations about how to fund the colleges and universities. So we have 191,000 students in our education system. We talked about financial aid yesterday and where Alabama compared, but this is how we rank overall in revenue. And this is state support, tuition, and fees. And Alabama ends up being well supported if you add all those numbers together. So we're actually 6th in the nation, which is probably not where you want to be, especially in having high tuition in a state that has a lot of low-income people. So this whole pressure on what is that balance between state support and tuition is important. And you can do it two ways. You can have high tuition and high aid, or you can have low tuition and keep your aid low. So it's really a philosophical question. We rank 11th at the two-year colleges, and at the 4 years, we are 6th. So those shows you the different sectors. If you just look at education appropriations, which is your part, we are funding our overall at 91. That's basically 91% of what the average states are doing. So the 2 years are actually funded above their peers in state funding, but the universities are at 0.89 or 89%. So there is a difference there, which is why their tuition is higher. And we need to ask the questions about tuition, because here is overall tuition. We're twice as high as the rest of the states in tuition revenue. Now, this is tuition revenue. Now, there are some schools that, charge 3 times the rate of out-of-state tuition, and people still come to their institution to watch football or whatever. So, but at the tuition revenue, we are now 4th in the nation, which normally you would not have a state that prides itself in having a reasonable low cost of living there. So 2-year schools are actually twice as high, too, in their tuition. And they tout they have low tuition, but that's because they compare it to the university's tuition. And so there's the 4 years. And then just want to mention, too, that, we're required to give you a consolidated budget recommendation for the institutions. We have hearings, and these are the issues that the campuses did, the items down in blue, talking about salaries, mandatory costs. And I want to mention mandatory costs in just a minute. So, we looked into considerations about the historical split. We always like to stay with the historical split. And we looked at our different recommendations. Now, we recommended over 6.5%. We know it has to be whittled down to 6.25%, which is fine. But there are some issues there. When we looked at all the campuses' budgets, normally we try to give raises to the campuses for their faculty because of the inflation that occurred the last couple of years, but we really couldn't do that this year because of several things. The mandatory funds, which is sort of what you just talked about, and I'll show you how that impacts higher ed in a second, and that 51% of our budget request is actually just based on inflation. If you look at the literature now on economics and how our economy has changed, they said that over 2/3 of inflation is corporate profits. And what has happened is all our vendors sort of stayed easy to keep us as customers during COVID and the tight times, and now they've upped the levels of increases pretty significantly. Well, the same thing actually happened with the mandatory funds. The retirement system and the PUP folks have tried to stay steady, but they did do an increase this year, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So that would be our distribution request, and of course, when you throw it over the fence to the universities, they can spend it any way they want to. It's just how we calculate it is based on the cost that they submit. So this is on the mandatory funds, and the big thing I want to highlight is that you can see they had a slight increase that reported to be what we'd have to pay for that. Significant is that that tiny increase that they have is going to impact almost more than 1/4 of our budget. So, of the 6.25%, you're going to need to have at least 28% of it is just going to go to cover the mandatory costs that are being, applied to the institutions. So that's an important reason why when you have a 6.25 cap, it can be difficult when there's mandatory costs running through it. Inflationary costs, a lot of the insurance companies, because it's hard to build things because they can't find workers and all that kind of stuff, now it's harder for their insurance. They've got a lot more liability. Everybody's suing when people fall on a campus or something. It's almost doubled in insurance. So those mandatory costs are actually 51% of that, which includes insurance and construction costs. And then we did try to encourage campuses to offer academic programs that are in high demand, high wage. And so about 20% of our formula went toward that method by funding institutions that do more of that than others. Here's the distribution, which is fairly similar to other years. And then that is what our recommendation for each of the institutions are based on those ratios. Any differences between institutions is often based on the academic program mix or their size, whether they do research and what their other state obligations are. And, I will mention too that I'll be glad to share you those slides, but I thought you want to know the context of why we make budget recommendations the way we do. Glad to take any questions.
Questions? Yes. Any questions, Dr. Purcell? Representative Daniels?
How you doing, Dr. Purcell?
Good, sir.
I know I wasn't here yesterday for your presentation. I understand you went through the various institutions and made recommendations. I know last year I had the same conversation about the things that you're considering when making these recommendations and these increase in recommendations, and whether or not it's and looking at the conditions around some of these places and the type of programs that they have on their campuses or type of programs that they want to have on their campuses, and whether or not what the competitive nature is around them for employment opportunities. So if you're here in Montgomery, you have two military base, a military base in proximity. You're looking at whether it's engineering or any other area. Are we considering any of those dynamics when making these decisions for the recommendations? Because I think it's easy to say percentage increases, but I think the hard work and very difficult work, and from your position I would understand, is looking at the return on investment for the state in these particular areas while taking those things in consideration before making a recommendation. Because at the end of the day, all of us want folks to, we want our students to graduate from institutions here in the state of Alabama. We want them to stay here within the state of Alabama. We want them to be able to have good paying jobs within the state of Alabama. And there's just a lot of dynamics that I think that we're missing. And we're allowing ourselves not to be as competitive long term. And some of these increases are too modest. I think recommendations are modest, and I don't know that we've thought deep into from a long term standpoint. So I can assure you that with the military bases here, it does present an issue for institutions that are here in Montgomery to be able to remain competitive in keeping the talent or retain the talent that they have. So it's just looking at those type of dynamics is something that I urge us to do, because right now we're just moving at a steady pace.
Yes, sir, and I totally agree with you, and I think the issue there is, we have the 6.25 cap we're trying to do, and if you just look at all the mandatory requirements, that's going to eat up 2/3 of that budget. So you only really had that 20% that we use for incentivizing high demand, high wage programs, and that's distributed to campuses that has those. We also looked at, institutions that had special situations over the years. This year we did not, but sometimes we do fund or request additional funds for things to cover costs, sort of like what we did with the Gulf Coast labs that were knocked over during one of the hurricanes. We asked for special money for that. So there are points where we will actually, the board will make an investment in specific initiatives, but this year there just wasn't enough money in our 6.25 that we had to restrict. Now, I would suggest that the supplemental is an ideal place to start those type things, because it may not have the same restriction, and then as those programs become successful, you can fund them. And really a lot of the demand the institutions have for one-time and capital needs can be very well done in supplemental. It is the ongoing cost to me that we have to cover in the O&M budget, which we sort of talk about more here. A&M on this particular budget, they have a big increase of $263 million, but a bunch of that is capital, which you can fund out of supplement. And normally we don't really look at the capital request from institutions, because in Alabama that's not a part of the ETF budget. It's sort of like always been one-time thing, just yet have a bond issue for those to happen. That is unfortunate, because in most states where I have worked, there was always funds set aside for building new buildings, for new sciences, new majors, new careers, those kind of things. But in this state, we don't do that. We just fund what is, and then if there's extra money on a rainy day, then we throw money to it. So it's not a great way to do it, but it is the way we do it right now.
And I just want to make sure that you understand, I support Alabama State, I support Tuskegee, Bishop State, I support everybody that's Troy University.
Yeah.
So I'm advocating for all of these institutions.
Yes. No, I agree.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Purcell.
Thank you.
Dr. Mackey?
Thank you, sir. Glad to be back.
Again, you don't have to cover everything you covered yesterday, but we'd like to just an overview.
Yes, sir. What I'd like to do, so you got, it's the same, the slides I submitted are actually the same slides, so I'm just not even going to pull them up, if that's okay. I mean, I can go to some if you want me to, but I'm not going to keep going through them. What I'd like to do is hit a couple of things that maybe hit really quickly yesterday and answer some of the questions. So first, I know Mr. Faulkner, I thought he wasn't here yesterday, but he was behind me. But to his point, he asked about the CALT teachers, what our budget request was. So we requested $12 million. Now, I just very early gotten a copy of the budget, so I haven't been able to go through and see how much is in there from the governor's recommendation to you. But that is a big increase. Again, I remind you that we had essentially no CALT teachers in 2018-19 working in public schools. Now, I'm not going to say, if I say there are none, somebody's going to email me and say I was, but there were essentially none. We've got 108 now, but we really need to build that out fast. I've run into no opposition from any of you. The big issue is not money, it's finding the teachers and convincing them to go through this very rigorous 3-year process to be CALT certified. Thus, the reason we've asked for $12 million, part of that is to pay for them to go through. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, we want to pay for the substitute teachers, we want to pay for everything. So there's no cost to the district, no cost to the teacher, and then also pay that teacher a supplement. I also got a question about the TEAMS Act. I can't remember who asked that. About 5% of our TEAMS teachers have come from out of state, which is around between 150 to 200 teachers from out of state. So about 95% of the TEAMS teachers are in-state teachers. Some of those that are in-state have come from outside of math and science. So we've had two other ways we've brought people in. We have had some teachers, I talked about this, and again, it's not high take up, but we've even had PE teachers who are certified, and all they have to do is go back and take the math or science praxis test if they have a qualifying score. And we use the national average, there's a national average range score, then they can get a certification in another field. So we have paid people to leave physical education, to leave the social studies classroom and become math teachers, to become a TEAMS teacher. And then we have been able to recruit some people in-state from industry too. But as far as the question was, how many people have come from out of state? It's about 5%, so a little less than 200 of the TEAMS teachers have come from out of state. So those are the specific questions I know I had yesterday that I didn't have answers to, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Representative Baker?
Dr. Mackey, if I might could just interrupt and maybe add to that on the teams, and this is maybe just sort of for the committee members just to be reminded on this. That is, so this isn't just extra then for those teams contract teachers that are math or science certified.
Yes, sir.
But they contract become extra credentialed.
Yes, sir.
So I wanted to make sure that's understood, because sometimes there are those who may think it's just the math and science teachers that are getting this extra opportunity, and it's not. They actually are engaged sort of over and beyond the normal math and science teacher in becoming extra credentialed, and also they also are voluntarily then giving up their tenure to be involved in on a ongoing sort of up to 3-year contract. So
yes, sir.
I did want to make that clear. So
I appreciate that.
We sometimes hear that we just think it's math and science teachers, and all of a sudden, because we know we have other fields that sort of there's shortages, special ed and such. But anyway, I did want to make that point. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Yes,
Any
and
comments,
he's
questions?
exactly right.
Any other comments or questions on that? Okay.
Right.
Dr. Mackey?
So the other things I did want to mention, I didn't go into as much yesterday, but some of the, I mentioned computer science, and that one of the things that we've done is probably 3 years ago, Code.org. Code.org is a big national organization, and they are kind of the certifiers of computer science and what states are doing in computer science. We've met with them this last year. I've had 2 opportunities to meet personally with the CEO of Code.org, have had additional calls with them since the Christmas break, and we are planning on meeting number 10. So they just added a 10th one they rolled out at their fall meeting in either October or November, that they want not only to meet the 9 criteria we meet, but they want every state to require computer science for high school graduation. And as I said, we are working on that. There are actually already, I think, there are 3 or 4 states that have already done that. One of the things we want to do, though, is make sure we don't water down what we're doing. So we want to require computer science, but we don't want to just say we're doing it and then say that, you know, anything counts as computer science. I don't know how many of you remember, but I remember the first goal, the first official legal goal in this state for how students would demonstrate their proficiency in the use of technology was, it's not been that long ago, it was set probably 15 or 16 years ago, and it was that every student before they graduate high school shall demonstrate that they have the ability to attach a document to an email and send the email. So that was 15 or 16 years ago. And so these things change pretty fast, but we intend to be fully aligned with code.org. So just so you know that, there are 2 things in there, though, I do want to mention. In the budget, you're going to see small line items for things like a program called Ed Farm that's based out of Birmingham. It's partnered with, but now they're doing some things in the Black Belt too. We feel very strongly about that. It's a real small amount of money, less than $3 million, but they basically teach high school kids coding, and really not just, I mean, we do coding even down to elementary school, like how they can come out of high school as a coder. We've also invested some money, some federal money, and we're going to ask you to continue that for a program called Quant Hub. And Quant Hub is a data science program started by a gentleman here that lives in the Birmingham area, and it's really good. And we've put it in our math curriculum it's on a voluntary basis now, but to basically make sure that students, as they are progressing, taking math, even we think we're going to work it into our English language arts, that they are also getting data analytics skills. So it's ways to build in computer science across the curriculum, and we plan on putting those kinds of things in our code.org plan. So just know they're small numbers, but they really are important to kind of make this whole computer science piece come together. Mr. Chairman.
You mentioned that computer science requirement was to send an email with an attachment. Yeah.
Yes.
We could also cover the reply to all function.
We'll work on that.
Okay.
Obviously, some of us, myself included, have often not understood that.
Yes. Anything else you want to cover? Or
No, sir, that's it.
Any
And
questions?
any questions, I'm glad
you
you
gave us a really good presentation yesterday. You have not had a chance really to look at the governor's budget.
No, sir, I really haven't.
Okay.
It's next on my list this morning.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Mackey? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate
Yes, sir.
it.
Thank you.
Any other comments or remarks by the members? Representative Daniels, good to see you here this morning.
He likes all public schools.
Absolutely, I love them all. You follow?
Well, we look forward. We did receive the governor's budget yesterday. I've not seen it. I'm meeting with Director Poole this afternoon just to kind of get more details. But we'll be, of course, the budget begins in the House this year, so we'll be jumping on it very early, and look forward to moving through that process. Any of you who need to meet with me in the committee that have questions or concerns or comments, just make sure that you schedule a time with Ms. Cheeks. You know the drill. If you have information or specific requests, we have she accumulates all of those. But look forward to a very productive session. This will be a record education budget, even though we're growing by only 6.25%. As the governor mentioned, it's a record year, and a lot of good to be said for the work this committee's done to put us in the great financial shape we're in. I really want to say that too. We are in really good financial shape as a state, and that's quite remarkable. And I will have also an update of the presentation with the planets that we did, just to kind of let you know where we are after COVID, post-COVID, and show you where we are. And how the new Opportunity Fund has impacted our standing and whatnot. So appreciate all of you. Look forward to a great session. Thank you. For adjourn.
Karen, will you have us a copy of